My name is Danielle Hart, and I'm 27 years old. Every summer, my family takes a trip to the Blue Harbor coast in Maine, a tradition we've kept alive for over 2 decades. It's one of those picture-perfect places with rocky beaches, lighthouses on the horizon, and seafood so fresh it tastes like the ocean itself. For years, that trip has been the one time we all come together, laugh, relax, and pretend the world isn't pulling us in different directions. But this year, something felt off. The planning calls were shorter, my texts were left unread longer than usual, and there was a quiet shift in tone that I tried so hard not to overthink. Still, I told myself it was just the stress everyone was under, or maybe I was being too sensitive. I clung to the hope that a week in Blue Harbor with my family would be the balm I desperately needed. Before I tell you what happened when I arrived at the resort and heard those words that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. The Hart family getaway wasn't just another vacation. It was our ritual. Every August since I was 5 years old, we'd pile into separate cars and head up the Maine coastline, always renting the same sprawling ocean view house nestled atop a cliff, surrounded by pine trees and salty breeze. My dad used to say that the second we passed that rusted sign for Cove's End, the real world faded behind us. I remember those early years like they were painted in gold. I was that little girl running barefoot along the rocks with my older brother Noah, racing to find sea glass before the tide pulled it away. My mom would prepare these elaborate picnic lunches with lobster rolls, fresh fruit, and that lemonade she always made with just a bit too much sugar. My dad would fire up the grill every evening, playing his same old blues playlist and humming along while pretending not to burn the burgers. And then there was the laughter. That easy, from-the-gut kind of laughter that made it feel like nothing else mattered. We'd stay up late around the fire pit, telling the same family stories, roasting marshmallows, and taking turns pretending we could see shapes in the stars. It felt sacred, like our own little pocket of the universe where time slowed down and all was forgiven. My mom, Linda, has always been the commander-in-chief of these trips. She had spreadsheets, folders, backup folders, and calendar alerts set months in advance. Somehow, even with everyone's busy lives, she managed to make it all happen. I used to joke that she could plan a moon landing if someone asked her to. She took real pride in it, and, truthfully, I admired her for it. This year, I needed that trip more than ever. I'd just taken on a grueling new role at my marketing firm in Portland. The hours were insane, the deadlines nonstop, and I hadn't had a full weekend off in what felt like ages. Add to that the slow unraveling of my 2-year relationship with Brandon, who I thought was the one, and I was just barely keeping it together. Some nights I'd come home, drop my bag by the door, and cry until the pillowcase went damp. So when August approached, Blue Harbor felt like a lifeline. Time to breathe, time to reset, time to be with the people who had known me forever. I imagined long walks along the bluff trail with Noah, deep conversations over wine with Mom, and my dad cracking terrible jokes while we grilled seafood under the stars. The very idea of it kept me going through some of my lowest moments. When the planning group chat started weeks in advance, it was the usual flurry at first. Noah sending links to restaurants, Mom suggesting whale-watching tours, Dad cracking dad jokes and offering zero logistical help. I offered to help too, book the house this year, maybe research some group activities, but Mom shut that down quick. "You just focus on work and getting some rest when we get there," she texted one afternoon. "I've got everything handled." At the time, I was grateful. It felt like care, like they understood how burnt out I was and wanted to take something off my plate. I even teared up a little reading that message, thinking, wow, they really get me. But in hindsight, I can't ignore the strange distance in their tone, the way my suggestions were ignored, the way the excitement that used to bounce between us felt strangely one-sided this time. Still, I chalked it up to the chaos of life. Everyone was busy. Everyone had their own stuff going on. And I was determined not to take it personally. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, is that this trip would be nothing like the ones before. That beneath the silence and the polite texts was something darker brewing, and that when I finally stepped onto the grounds of the Blue Harbor Seaside Inn, the place that had once felt like a second home, I would feel like a stranger. A stranger whose presence wasn't just unexpected, but entirely unwelcome. And that was just the beginning. The part where everything I believed about love, trust, and family would start to unravel. There's something about memory that plays tricks on you. You don't realize you've been rewriting the past until you're standing in the present, watching it unravel. I'd always clung to those childhood summers in Blue Harbor like they were untouchable, sacred. But in the days leading up to the trip, I started noticing cracks in the stories I'd built around my family. Little moments that once seemed harmless now felt heavier. Growing up, my brother Noah and I were close in that way siblings sometimes are when they grow up in a small, emotionally unpredictable house. We became each other's safe place. He was 3 years older, infinitely cooler, and somehow always knew how to distract me when the tension between our parents got too loud to ignore. We'd disappear for hours along the beach trail near our rental house, pretending to hunt sea creatures or plan pirate adventures. Looking back, it wasn't just play, it was escape. I don't think I understood back then how hard my mom worked to keep everything looking perfect from the outside. Linda Hart could turn chaos into a curated experience. Every summer she created magic, a choreographed illusion that everything was fine. Matching towels, homemade meals, synchronized itineraries that left no room for awkward silences or difficult conversations. She called it keeping the peace, but it often felt more like hiding. My dad, Tom, was more of a background character, present physically but emotionally reserved. He'd show up when it mattered on paper, driving us to the harbor, grilling dinner, buying fresh taffy from the boardwalk shop like clockwork. But his affection came in measured doses, rare smiles, fewer words, a kind of love that existed more in action than in presence. I used to think that was just how dads were. It took me years, and a fair amount of therapy, to understand how much I craved his full attention. Still, for a long time, those summer trips made me feel like we were a normal family. Better than normal, even. We weren't rich, but the house we rented always felt like luxury. Sun-bleached wood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows that opened to the ocean breeze, and a back deck that seemed to hang over the cliffs like a private stage to the sea. Those vacations were the one time I felt like the real version of myself. Not the quiet girl at school, not the overachiever with anxiety, but Danielle. The fun one, the beachcomber, the storyteller. And for a while, I believed everyone felt that way. I remember the summer I turned 17, probably the last trip where I felt truly connected to my family. Noah had just finished his first year of college and brought his then-girlfriend, Clara. She was warm and funny and made me feel included, even though I was just his kid sister. That trip was all golden sunsets, silly card games, and whispered confessions under starry skies. But something shifted the year after. Noah stopped coming regularly. Clara disappeared without explanation. Mom started snapping more, smiling less. And Dad? Well, he leaned harder into silence. I convinced myself it was normal, that growing up just meant growing apart. But the truth is, the distance started long before we noticed it. I can't help but think now that I romanticized the past because it was easier than facing the present. Because if I admitted that things hadn't been perfect back then, it would make the hurt I was about to experience so much more unbearable. That summer, the one I'm about to tell you about, was supposed to be a return to those golden days. But instead of healing old wounds, it exposed them. Instead of finding connection, I found silence, and not the peaceful kind. There were signs, of course, if I'd let myself look closer, like the time a month before the trip when Mom forgot to loop me in on a group FaceTime about the house rental, or when Noah posted photos of a planning dinner at our favorite seafood shack without me. I commented something lighthearted, "Where was my invite?" and got a single like in return. No reply. No explanation. Even then, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe they assumed I was too busy. Maybe I hadn't been as present over the past year as I thought I was. The thing about people who are good at pretending, they teach you to do the same. And I'd become very, very good at pretending. I wanted this trip to be different. I wanted it to be healing. I needed it to prove that family could still mean safety and belonging. So I kept believing. I kept packing. I kept showing up. But what I didn't realize was that while I was preparing to step into a story of reconnection, they had already rewritten the script without me, and the scene waiting for me at Blue Harbor would be nothing like the one I'd played over and over in my mind. As the days inched closer to our departure, I found myself clinging to hope like it was the last life raft in a storm I refused to see coming. I wanted so badly to believe that the offness I'd sensed in our group chats, the short replies, the missed calls, the subtle distancing, was all just in my head. That once I stepped foot on that rocky coast, everything would snap back into place like the tide returning to shore. But that's the thing about intuition. It whispers until it screams. The planning phase had always been one of my favorite parts of our summer traditions. We'd exchange memes in the group text, argue about playlists for the drive, and suggest excursions like we were planning the most luxurious adventure of the year. Normally, my phone would light up with messages from Mom, Noah, and even Dad, who'd throw in an occasional one-liner just to make us laugh. This year, though, the tone was different. The group chat was quieter, more functional, less playful. No one seemed interested in my suggestions. When I offered to help book the house or coordinate activities, something I'd done more than once in years past, Mom responded quickly but politely. "Already handled, sweetheart. Just relax, focus on work. We've got everything covered." At the time, it felt like kindness, like support. I even screenshotted her text and sent it to my best friend Claire, adding, "See? They're giving me space. They get it." Claire replied with a single raised eyebrow emoji. I should have paid more attention to that. I told myself they were just trying to take care of me. That after the burnout, the breakup, and the countless late nights at the office, they simply wanted me to rest. And honestly, I wanted that to be true. So I leaned into the fantasy. I went shopping for new summer clothes, sundresses, linen pants, soft knits that whispered, "Put together," without trying too hard. I splurged on a pair of beach sandals that cost more than my grocery budget, convinced they'd make me feel like myself again. I even stopped by a local bookstore to pick out beach reads, stacking thrillers and essays into a tote bag I labeled vacation mode. But beneath all that preparation, something inside me stayed restless, like I was trying to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I still belonged, that this trip, this family, this place still included me. The weekend before departure, I texted the group chat, "Hey, just confirming we're all still meeting at the inn on Monday, right? Check-in's at 3. Should I bring anything for the kitchen?" No reply. Not for an hour, then 2, then a full day. Eventually, Mom responded, "Everything's still on track, Danielle. Don't worry about groceries. We've got it handled. Just bring your beautiful self." The words looked sweet, supportive, but they felt hollow. Noah didn't reply at all. Dad heart-reacted the message and said nothing. I tried to shake it off. I reminded myself that people are busy, that texts get missed. But the silence hit different this time. Because deep down, I think part of me already knew. Still, I clung to the image in my head, arriving at the inn, dropping my bags in the familiar hallway. That first night gathered around the deck with drinks in hand, the sun dipping behind the cliffs as we all exhaled together. I even made a playlist for the drive, labeled it Blue Harbor Energy, because if I could just get there, just arrive, everything would make sense again. The morning of the trip was clear and warm, a rare kind of New England August day where the humidity takes a break and the sky stretches open like an invitation. I woke up early, full of nervous energy, packed and repacked my things, triple-checked the route, loaded my trunk with neatly folded outfits, a basket of handmade sea salt caramels I'd picked up for Mom, and a little corked bottle of local whiskey for Dad. My solo drive would take just under 3 hours, just enough time to listen to my playlist, sip iced coffee, and let the weight of the last few months melt away. I imagined pulling into the inn's circular driveway and seeing them waiting for me. Mom waving, Dad leaning against the porch rail, Noah grinning as he pretended to check his watch. Instead, what waited for me was silence. About halfway into the drive, I tried calling Mom. Straight to voicemail. Tried Noah. Nothing. Dad's phone rang twice, then went dead. I sent a text. On my way, can't wait to see you all. Let me know if you want to grab dinner when I arrive. No reply. Still, I didn't panic. Maybe they were already on the road, or at a rest stop. Maybe there was bad service along the coast. But something about that silence, it gnawed at me. When I finally turned onto that familiar gravel road leading up to Blue Harbor Seaside Inn, I expected the butterflies. What I didn't expect was the dread. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to go the way I'd planned. And I was right. Because waiting just beyond those white-shuttered doors was a reality I hadn't prepared for. A truth that would hit harder than any heartbreak I'd ever known. The first thing I noticed as I pulled into the circular driveway of the Blue Harbor Seaside Inn was how perfect everything looked. Sunlight spilled across the whitewashed facade, and hanging baskets overflowed with lavender and pale pink petunias. The flagstone walkway gleamed as if it had just been hosed down. Seagulls circled overhead like actors cast to make the moment feel cinematic. It was everything I remembered, everything I'd been aching for. But nothing could have prepared me for what was waiting inside. I stepped through those double-glass doors, dragging my luggage behind me, wearing my favorite sundress, the one Mom always said brought out my eyes. The coolness of the lobby hit instantly, a welcome contrast to the warm coastal air outside. Soft piano music floated from hidden speakers, and the scent of lemon verbena drifted from the reception desk. For a brief moment, I let myself believe I was safe again. Home, even. The front desk was manned by a young man with sandy blonde hair, crisp attire, and the kind of polished smile you expect from luxury resorts. His name tag read, Caleb. "Hi there," I greeted him, smiling brightly. "Checking in. The reservation should be under Hart. Tom or Linda Hart, maybe even my brother Noah." He nodded, fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. I waited, heart lifting just a little, imagining the look of surprise on Mom's face when she saw me walk through the suite door, maybe even the kind of welcome that would erase the unease I'd felt for weeks. But then, Caleb's brow furrowed. Let me just check something," he murmured, his voice shifting ever so slightly. "Sometimes it's under the guest's first name instead of the last." He typed again, clicked, scanned. I kept smiling, though it was beginning to feel forced. Maybe try Linda Hart, or Tom Hart, possibly Noah Hart. We've been coming here every summer for years, so I'm sure we're in there somewhere. I even gave a soft chuckle to ease the tension I could feel creeping in, but Caleb's expression didn't change. In fact, it deepened. "Miss Hart, I've checked all variations of those names for this weekend's bookings, and I'm not seeing a reservation under any of them." The air in my lungs stalled. "That can't be right," I said, too quickly. "We always stay here. Every August, same week, same place. My mom said everything was booked and handled." He gave me a patient smile, the kind meant to calm difficult guests. "Do you happen to have a confirmation email or code? That might help narrow it down." I reached into my bag, rifling through receipts, printed directions, a paperback novel, a mini bottle of sunscreen, but no confirmation. Of course I didn't have it. Mom always handled that. She'd told me not to worry. "I don't have it, but I promise I'm supposed to be here. We always stay at this inn. Always. This is our family's tradition." Caleb glanced toward a second receptionist and whispered something before turning back to me. Let me try running a cross-check with room numbers. Do you know what kind of suite you were booked into? My voice faltered. We usually stay in the windward suite. That's our usual. It sounded desperate even to my own ears. He typed, waited, clicked, then paused. I do see a windward suite under a Hart reservation, he said carefully, but it only lists 3 guests, Tom, Linda, and Noah. I'm not seeing your name attached to it. The floor felt like it tilted beneath me. I don't understand, I whispered. That has to be wrong. I mean, they know I'm coming. They told me not to worry. I even texted them on the way here. I pulled out my phone and opened our family group chat. And that's when I noticed it. Something I hadn't seen before. The messages from the past 3 days, my texts, my cheerful check-ins, stood alone. No replies, no reactions, nothing. Just a one-sided thread, as if I'd been messaging into a void. I checked my call log. Voicemail. 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 A chill crept up my spine. Can you check if they've already checked in? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe they're waiting in the room or at the bar or... Caleb nodded and ran the search, then looked back at me with a mix of sympathy and awkwardness. They checked in a little over an hour ago. 3 guests, windward suite. They didn't leave any notes about additional arrivals. And that was the moment it hit me, not as a whisper, not as a flicker of doubt, but as a roaring, crashing certainty. They hadn't forgotten me. They had left me out. The mug I'd been holding, gifted from Claire, painted with the words, "You got this," slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble tile. I didn't even flinch, because in that moment the sound of ceramic breaking felt appropriate. It matched the exact noise happening in my chest. Caleb flinched. Another staff member rushed forward to clean the mess, murmuring reassurances. I just stood there, blinking at the empty reservation screen, my hands suddenly weightless, my legs strangely unsteady. "Miss Hart," Caleb said gently, "maybe you could try calling your family? Sometimes there's just a mix-up, or maybe they meant to let the front desk know." "No," I interrupted softly, my voice hollow. "They knew. They just didn't include me." I stood there, still as stone, while vacationers passed behind me, sunburnt and laughing, dragging pool bags, humming along to the soft lobby music. The world kept spinning, unaware that mine had just tipped entirely off its axis. I had come for comfort, for belonging, for the arms of the people who knew me best. But what I found was a front desk clerk with kind eyes and no answers. And the unmistakable echo of being deliberately, unmistakably excluded. After the mug shattered across the polished marble floor, a hush seemed to settle over the lobby. Not from the staff. They moved quickly and discreetly to clean it up, professionally pretending nothing had happened. But inside me, everything went silent, like the part of my brain that processes sound had temporarily short-circuited from the emotional blow. I stood frozen, not just from the embarrassment of the moment, but from the unmistakable truth still ringing in my ears. They were already here, checked in, without me. Caleb offered to hold my bags at the concierge desk while I sorted things out, but his voice had softened in a way I recognized too well, the way people speak when they see something they don't quite understand, but know it hurts. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, the words catching on the sharp edges of my breath. Then, somehow, I started moving. My feet carried me down the inn's corridor, past tall windows glowing gold with late afternoon light. It should have been a moment of peace, a beautiful summer scene by the water. But everything felt wrong now, like I'd stepped into a story where my name had been quietly erased from the cast list. I wandered the winding hallways of the Blue Harbor Seaside Inn, checking every familiar spot where we usually gathered in years past. The lounge, the deck, the fire pit area near the bluff. My pulse pounded with each step, hands clammy against the cool leather of my crossbody bag. I passed cheerful guests sipping wine, reading paperbacks, watching the waves roll in with soft smiles, and I hated them a little, not for their joy, but because they didn't look lost. I did. It wasn't until I reached the poolside restaurant, the Salt and Vine, that I saw them. My mother, Linda, sat at the far corner of the outdoor patio, sipping a tall citrus cocktail, her blonde hair perfectly curled. My father, Tom, leaned back in his chair, sunglasses perched on his head, laughing at something unseen, and Noah, my older brother, my once best friend, sat next to them in a designer polo, phone in hand, a half-empty beer beside him. They looked relaxed, completely at ease, not worried, not searching for me, not even slightly out of place. My throat tightened as I watched them laugh under the string lights, as if they were exactly where they were supposed to be. And I was the one who didn't belong. Still, I walked toward them, because some part of me still needed to believe this could be salvaged. "There you are," I called out, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I've been looking everywhere." 3 heads turned. 3 pairs of eyes met mine, and not one of them lit up. Tom looked away almost immediately, toward the harbor like something fascinating had just happened out on the water. Linda's hand flew to her necklace, a nervous tic I remembered from childhood, and she began to fidget with it, avoiding my gaze. But Noah looked straight at me, and I saw it. Coldness, distance, something rehearsed. "Oh," he said flatly. "You're here." Just that. No smile, no hug, no "we've been so worried." Not even a "we thought you were arriving later." "Of course I'm here," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've been planning this trip for months, but the front desk couldn't find my name in the system. I've been calling and texting. Did you not get them?" Linda wouldn't meet my eyes. Tom pretended to examine his drink. Noah took a long sip of his beer. "That's strange," Linda finally said, her voice tight. "Maybe the reservation system had a glitch?" "Or maybe," Noah added casually, "you booked the wrong place." There it was again, that edge in his tone I couldn't quite place. Mocking, defensive, detached, whatever it was, it stung. "No, it's definitely this inn. Caleb checked. He even confirmed you all checked in an hour ago." I tried to laugh it off, keep the tone light. "Must have just been a mix-up, right? Maybe we can add me to the suite, or—" "Actually," Tom finally spoke, still not looking at me. "They mentioned the inn's at full capacity. There's some kind of conference this weekend. All the rooms are booked." "But you have a suite," I pointed out. "You're here. There has to be space for one more. It's just me." Linda's fingers twisted around the charm on her necklace. Noah leaned back in his chair. "We only booked the suite for 3 people," she said carefully. "It's designed for 4, technically, but with all your dad's gear and Noah's work calls, it's kind of full." And that's when it hit me. There were 4 of us. Mom, Dad, Noah, me. If the room fit 4, and only 3 were booked, then this wasn't an accident. This was intentional. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Why wasn't I included?" The silence that followed was so heavy it nearly knocked the wind out of me. They didn't answer. They didn't explain. They just looked uncomfortable. Like I was a stranger who had stumbled into their private dinner. I waited for a smile, a laugh, a moment of clarity, but none came. Only Noah's voice, calm and cruel. "Things have changed, Danielle," he said. "We thought it might be better if this trip was just for those who wanted to be together." Those words sliced through me harder than any breakup, because they weren't vague, they weren't accidental, they were chosen, practiced, planned. And suddenly I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. They had come to Blue Harbor without me, and they had done it on purpose. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. Noah's words echoed in my ears like they'd been amplified by the ocean breeze itself. We thought it might be better if this trip was just for those who wanted to be together. Each syllable sank like a stone into my chest, dragging down everything I thought I understood about my family. I stared at them, my mother, father, brother, searching for some crack in their expressions, some flicker of guilt, a wince, a softening. But all I found was avoidance, discomfort, and a quiet readiness to move on like I was an unexpected interruption. "What are you talking about?" I finally managed, though my voice had lost its usual steadiness. "Of course I want to be here. I thought we all did." Linda picked up her glass again, her fingers trembling slightly against the condensation. "It's just been tense lately," she said carefully. "And with everything going on, your job, the breakup, the stress, you've seemed distant." I blinked. "I've seemed distant?" "You've made everything about your problems lately, Danielle," Noah cut in, tone suddenly firmer. "Every conversation turns into your stress or your burnout. It's exhausting." I looked to my dad, silently begging for him to step in, to soften this blow, but Tom just stirred his drink with the tiny wooden skewer and kept his eyes locked on the rippling surface. "I didn't realize needing support made me a burden," I said, a bitter laugh catching in my throat. "It's not about that," Linda insisted, though she still wouldn't meet my eyes. "We just thought it would be more peaceful this way." Peaceful, like I was chaos. It felt like someone had reached inside me and pulled out my lungs. "So you planned this?" I asked slowly, the realization hardening in my gut. "You booked the room without me. You had the planning calls without me. You talked about me behind my back, and no one thought maybe I deserved a conversation before you cut me out?" No one answered. Not right away. Then Noah leaned back, arms crossed. "We didn't want to fight with you, Danielle. Every time we bring something up, you turn it into a guilt trip. You cry or shut down or make it about how unfair everyone's being. It gets old." I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, rage, humiliation, heartbreak all tangled together. "So instead, you decided to humiliate me in public? To let me show up here thinking I was still part of this family, only to find out I wasn't even invited?" The words came faster now, fueled by a storm I could no longer contain. "Do you even hear yourselves? Do you understand how cruel this is?" Linda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her glass now empty, her mouth pressed in a tight line. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, as if that made any of this better. "But you did," I replied, my voice cracking. "You hurt me, deeply, and the worst part is you planned it. You sat in a room, or a group chat, or a call, and decided together that I wasn't worth including." A hush fell over the patio. Until that moment, I hadn't realized how many other diners had gone quiet. Conversations had slowed, forks hovered mid-air, and a few subtle glances had begun shifting in our direction. We were no longer just a family having an awkward reunion. We were a spectacle. "Danielle, please," Linda started, her voice laced with warning. "Don't make a scene." That was it. The final crack. "I didn't make this scene," I said, rising from the table, hands trembling. "You did. When you booked this trip and decided I didn't belong. When you let me drive here thinking I was part of something that clearly ended without telling me." Noah scoffed. "You're being dramatic." I turned to him, heart pounding. "And you're being a coward." Gasps, soft murmurs, a clatter of silverware in the distance. "You all sat here pretending this was okay," I continued, unable to stop now. "Pretending I wouldn't notice that I've been slowly erased from the family like I was just inconvenient." "That's not fair," Tom muttered, but the words sounded empty, deflated. He still wouldn't look at me. "No. What's not fair is being made to feel like I'm too much to love, like needing support makes me disposable." Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't let them fall. Not here, not in front of them, because in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was clarity. The people at this table, they didn't see me. Not really. Not anymore. And maybe, just maybe, they never had. "You know what?" I said, squaring my shoulders. "You want peace? You can have it. I'm done begging for a seat at a table that doesn't even want me." I turned without waiting for a reply, walking away as the whispers around the patio began to rise behind me. A few curious eyes followed me as I passed. I didn't care, because in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. If family can cut you out with silence and still sleep at night, then maybe it's not a family worth holding on to. I didn't stop walking until I reached the far edge of the inn's property. Beyond the manicured garden paths and the soft clink of glasses on restaurant patios, I found a quiet bench that faced the water, half shaded by a gnarled pine tree, its branches reaching like arms toward the sea. There, with the wind tousling my hair and the faint scent of salt hanging in the air, I finally let myself breathe. But not cry. Not yet. The tears were close, clawing at the back of my throat, but something inside me had gone still. A silence deeper than grief, more piercing than shock. I wasn't sure what to call it then. Only now do I recognize it as the beginning of my clarity. For so long, I'd made excuses. I told myself that being left out of the planning calls was just bad timing, that being talked over in conversations was just how our family worked, that the slow fading of invitations wasn't intentional, but the truth had never been subtle. It had been in the silence, in the sideways glances, in the way my needs were always a lot, and their discomfort was always understandable. And now, standing in the wreckage of a moment I could never unsee, it was all crystal clear. They didn't forget me. They excluded me, on purpose. I sat on that bench for what felt like hours, watching the waves roll in and pull back again, like they were the only ones brave enough to come and go without apology. My phone buzzed a few times in my pocket. Probably Claire. Maybe even a coworker checking on a deadline. Definitely not anyone sitting 200 feet behind me at a table for 3. I didn't look. Instead, I stared out at the sea and asked myself something I should have asked years ago. What if I stopped chasing people who made me feel hard to love? What if I stopped minimizing my pain just to protect their comfort? What if, this time, I chose me? I stood up slowly, brushing sand from the back of my dress. The wind had picked up, pulling my hair across my face in tangled waves. I didn't fix it. I didn't smooth anything. For once, I wasn't trying to appear together. There was power in the mess. I made my way back to the lobby of the Blue Harbor Seaside Inn. Caleb, the same kind receptionist from earlier, was still at the desk. When he looked up and saw me, his expression softened into something that wasn't pity, but respect. "Miss Hart," he said gently, "is everything okay?" I took a breath, then nodded. "Actually, Caleb, I'd like to find another place to stay tonight. Somewhere peaceful. Somewhere not here." He didn't ask for details. He just gave me a small professional smile and began typing. "Let's see what I can find," he said. "There's a boutique property about 15 minutes north, right on the bluffs. It's called the Shoreline House. Very private. They just had a cancellation in their best oceanfront suite." "That sounds perfect," I said. And I meant it. While Caleb made the reservation, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't thought of in a while. Jasmine Avery, my old college roommate, now a luxury travel coordinator and social media genius. She once joked she could turn a farm stay into a 5-star event. I hit call. "Danielle?" she answered on the second ring, voice bright. "Oh my God, it's been forever!" "Jazz," I exhaled, the dam finally breaking in the form of a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for hours. "I'm on Blue Harbor, and I need your help creating the best solo vacation of my life." There was a pause, then a grin in her voice. "Say no more. By the time Caleb handed me a printed folder with directions, reservation info, and a car scheduled to pick me up in 20 minutes, I felt something I hadn't felt since the moment I stepped foot in this town. A little bit like myself again. Not the version my family dismissed, not the one they painted as dramatic or exhausting, but the real me. The woman who had endured heartbreak, a crushing job, and now the worst kind of familial betrayal, and still stood upright. I posted a short message to my private Instagram account, just a photo of the bench by the sea and the caption, "Turns out peace comes when you stop trying to fit where you're no longer welcome." Almost instantly, friends began responding. Claire texted a string of fire emojis and, "I'm so proud of you." Another old friend wrote, "That's the Danielle I remember. Go live your life." And for the first time in days, I smiled. Not for anyone else, not for optics, just for me. The car ride to the shoreline house was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that presses on your chest, but the kind that gives you room to breathe again. As the inn faded behind me, its manicured paths, its curated perfection, and its painfully familiar faces, I felt something strange fluttering in my chest, a feeling I hadn't felt in months. Relief. The winding coastal road hugged the cliffs as we drove north, the sun dipping low over the Atlantic. I rolled down the window halfway, letting the breeze hit my skin. The salty air tangled in my hair. I didn't reach for my brush. I let it stay wild. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't rushing to fix anything. Not my appearance, not the mood, not myself. When we pulled up to the shoreline house, it felt like a secret hidden from the world. A modern gray and white cottage-style inn sat nestled between dense pine woods and a stretch of untouched coastline. No grand entrances, no marble floors, just wide wraparound porches, swaying hammocks, and the kind of quiet that made your shoulders drop before you even stepped out of the car. The concierge greeted me like I was a returning friend. "Welcome, Miss Hart. We've been expecting you. Jasmine sent over your preferences. Everything has been arranged." I blinked. Everything? Spa treatments, private wine tasting, ocean kayaking, and a dinner reservation at Pelican's Table tomorrow night. Would you like help unpacking? I almost laughed, not out of mockery but surprise, because it had been so long since someone, anyone, had made me feel thought of without strings attached. "No unpacking needed," I replied softly. "Just point me to the ocean." My suite, aptly named the Driftwood Room, was perched on the second floor with a private balcony overlooking the cliffs. Inside, it smelled like cedarwood and fresh linen. Pale blues and soft creams filled the space, like someone had designed it to match the sea itself. I dropped my bags by the door, walked barefoot across the wide planked floors, then stepped out onto the balcony. And there it was. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, waves rolling with no concern for who arrived or left, no judgment, no shame. Just movement. Just presence. And in that moment, something in me cracked open. Not from pain this time, but from release. I texted Jasmine a quick thank you, adding, "You saved me. I didn't even know how badly I needed this." She wrote back almost immediately, "That's what sisters do, even if we're not related by blood." I stared at her message for a long time, because in 12 words, Jasmine reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That chosen family can offer the kind of unconditional care that blood sometimes withholds. That evening, I walked down to the inn's cliffside fire pit. A few other solo travelers were there, reading, sipping wine, quietly watching the stars emerge one by one. I found an empty chair, wrapped myself in one of the soft knit blankets they provided, and just existed. No one asked me to smile. No one needed me to explain why I was alone. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't even known I'd lost. Belonging. Not to anyone else, but to myself. Back in my room, I opened my laptop and began documenting the day. Not as a rant, not as a passive-aggressive family post, but as a reflection, an unfolding. I wrote about what it meant to choose peace, to walk away from a table where you were no longer fed, to build a vacation, no, a life, designed around your own joy. I added a caption. Turns out, sometimes the loneliest walk leads you straight back to yourself. Within minutes, the post began to fill with comments, messages from old college friends, acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. Even a coworker I barely knew wrote, "Thank you. I didn't know I needed to read this today." And once again, I felt it. Not validation from applause, but resonance. Like maybe, by speaking my truth, I had carved space for someone else's. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of the ocean, wrapped in soft sheets and something even warmer. Dignity, the kind that doesn't demand to be seen, but quietly holds its place. The next morning, I would wake early, book a yoga class on the cliffs, sip fresh-pressed juice while reading something that wasn't work-related, meet the sommelier Jasmine had arranged for a private tasting, and I would do it all not to prove a point, but because I deserved it, because healing isn't just about walking away from what hurts, it's about walking toward what finally feels like home. By the third day of my solo retreat at the Shoreline House, I had started to feel lighter. Not entirely healed, not magically whole, but freer. Each morning began with a slow ritual, coffee on the balcony, a soft robe wrapped around me, the waves below whispering like old friends. My phone stayed mostly on silent. I checked messages only when I felt like it. I replied only when I wanted to. It felt revolutionary. That afternoon, Jasmine had arranged something special, a private dinner reservation at Seagrass, the most coveted restaurant on the island. It was perched high on a bluff, known for its seasonal tasting menu and panoramic ocean views. Most people waited months for a table. Jasmine had called in a favor. "Trust me," she'd texted earlier. "Tonight's the night you remember exactly who you are." And she was right. I wore an emerald green dress that hugged my body just enough to make me feel beautiful without trying. My hair fell in soft waves. My makeup glowed with that dewy kind of elegance I'd never quite mastered until now. I wasn't dressed to impress anyone else. I was dressed for the woman I was becoming. The hostess greeted me with warmth and recognition. "Miss Hart, welcome back," and led me to a window table lit with golden candlelight and views that seemed to stretch forever. The meal began with scallop carpaccio and ended with a lavender creme brulee that nearly brought me to tears. Midway through my wine pairing, an older gentleman seated at the next table leaned over with a kind smile. "Pardon me," he said, "but you seem to be having the most peaceful evening I've seen in weeks. That's rare around here." I laughed gently. "It's been a long time coming." He introduced himself as Richard Chin, a retired hotelier with properties across New England. Our conversation flowed like we were old friends: hospitality, solo travel, the art of reclaiming your own time. He listened without interrupting. He complimented without condescension. And then something shifted in the air. A voice, shrill, familiar, demanding. "Excuse me, but we had a reservation for 7:30. Why are we being told there's no availability?" I turned, and there they were, Linda, Tom, Noah, at the entrance. Dressed up, flustered, speaking with the hostess, my family. They hadn't seen me yet, but I saw everything. The tension in Linda's brows, Tom's impatient frown, Noah's arms crossed, tapping his foot like entitlement alone would unlock the door. The irony was delicious. 3 people who had excluded me from a trip I once cherished, now standing outside the very place I'd been invited into. They hadn't planned for this. For me to thrive without them. For me to bloom somewhere they weren't welcome. I turned back to Richard with a small smile. "Please excuse me a moment." I stood up calmly, adjusting my dress, and walked toward the hostess stand. Their heads turned at the sound of my heels. Eyes widened. Expressions froze. "Danielle?" Linda breathed. "Good evening," I said smoothly, as if I were greeting a stranger at a fundraiser. "You look," Tom began, but I raised a hand. "It's okay," I said, gently but firmly. "You don't need to say anything." I turned to the hostess. "They're looking for a table, but they didn't make a reservation?" "Correct," the hostess said apologetically. "We're completely full tonight." I paused, then tilted my head. "I don't know these people," I said, voice calm as glass. "But if they're causing trouble, perhaps they should wait outside." The silence was instant. Even the clinking of glasses in the restaurant seemed to stop for a beat. Linda blinked like she'd been slapped. Tom opened his mouth, then closed it again. Noah just stared. "Danielle, please," Linda said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" "Talk?" I echoed softly. "About what? How you erased me from a family tradition? How you watched me cry in public and did nothing? Or maybe how you let me drive hours to be humiliated while you sipped cocktails like nothing happened?" The words weren't sharp, they weren't loud, but they were clear, undeniable. Tom stepped forward slightly. "We made a mistake." I nodded slowly. "Yes, you did." "But I didn't." "What do you mean?" Noah asked, his voice quieter than usual. "I mean, I didn't make the mistake of begging for love from people who couldn't give it freely. I didn't make the mistake of believing I needed your approval to be worthy. And I'm definitely not making the mistake of going backward." The hostess glanced toward me, waiting. I turned to her with a gracious smile. "I believe my table is waiting." And with that, I walked away. Back at my seat, Richard offered a raised glass. "To knowing your worth," he said. "To not settling for less," I replied, and we clinked glasses. Outside the window, the sea shimmered beneath the moonlight. Inside, I wasn't broken. I was blooming. Not in spite of them, but finally, without them. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset, not because I replayed the confrontation at Seagrass over and over, but because something in me had awakened, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Certainty. For years, I had walked on eggshells around the people who should have made me feel safest. I had downplayed my successes to protect their egos, softened my truth to avoid their judgment, bit my tongue when their silence hurt me more than any words ever could. But that night, as I lay beneath the linen sheets at the shoreline house, with the ocean humming outside my window like a lullaby I'd almost forgotten how to hear, I felt peace. Not performative peace, not borrowed peace, but the kind that settles in your bones and whispers, "You don't have to prove anything anymore." The next morning, I rose before the sun. I wrapped myself in a light shawl, poured a cup of coffee from the in-room brewer, and stepped onto the balcony just as the sky began to shift, pinks and silvers stretching across the horizon like a watercolor still drying. And I stood there. No phone, no filter, no audience. Just me, in the presence of my own becoming. I thought about what happened at the restaurant the night before, the stunned looks, the silence, the way Linda, Tom, and Noah stood frozen, as if they had finally seen me clearly, not as the convenient daughter, the emotional afterthought, or the one who could be left behind without consequence, but as a woman who had learned how to walk away. And that was the moment the power shifted. Because I didn't need their apology. I didn't crave their validation. I had finally seen the truth. Sometimes the closure we're looking for isn't words, it's a boundary. After breakfast, I opened my laptop and began to write. Not for social media, not for approval, but for myself. I poured every truth I had held back, about being the emotional glue of a family that never thanked me, about the cost of invisibility, about the weight of constantly trying to be enough for people who moved the finish line every time I got close. And when I finished, I hit save. Not publish, just save. Because not every truth needs to be shared to be powerful. Some are meant to be held close, like armor. Later that afternoon, I met with Richard Chin, the kind man from the night before. We had coffee on the terrace overlooking the cove. He asked about my work in marketing, and I told him more than I usually told strangers. For some reason, it felt easy. "You've got instinct," he said, tapping the rim of his cup. And presence. Ever thought about working in hospitality strategy? My company could use someone like you. I blinked. Are you serious? He smiled. Dead serious. Let's talk next week. No pressure. And just like that, another door opened. Not because I begged, not because I performed, but because I showed up as myself. As the day faded into evening, I found myself walking barefoot along the beach below the inn. The tide was coming in, brushing cold foam against the shore like a reminder. Nothing stays still, not even pain. I thought of all the versions of me that had walked this coastline before. The hopeful girl packing gifts for her family. The anxious woman trying to make space for everyone but herself. The heartbroken daughter wondering if she had simply imagined the love she thought she deserved. They were still part of me, but they didn't define me. Not anymore. When I returned to my room, I found a note slipped under the door. It was handwritten, no return address, but I knew the handwriting. Linda. Danielle, we were shocked by last night. We didn't realize you felt this way. Maybe we didn't handle things well. Maybe we should talk. Please don't cut us off. Love, Mom. There was no apology, no ownership, just maybe. And I realized something that sealed the shift inside me. They still didn't get it. They weren't sorry for the betrayal. They were sorry they got caught in the consequence. I folded the note gently, placed it in the drawer of the nightstand, and closed it without a second thought. Because I no longer needed them to see me. I saw myself now, and for the first time in a long, long time. That was enough. It's been 6 months since my trip to Blue Harbor, but the echoes of that week haven't faded. They've simply shifted into something quieter, more grounded, more mine. I didn't expect my life to change so completely. But it did. I took that meeting with Richard Chin, and we ended up building something that feels meaningful, soulful hospitality work that goes beyond brochures and bookings. We create spaces that hold people the way we all wish family could. I never thought I'd end up here. But now I can't imagine being anywhere else. My days are slower now. Not in pace, but in intention. I wake up with soft sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors of my loft, not the heavy weight of expectations pressing on my chest. I work with people who listen, who laugh freely, who don't mistake emotional depth for weakness. And the people I let into my life now, they don't just take up space, they hold space. There's Claire, who still texts me daily memes like we're teenagers again. There's Jasmine, who makes sure I never forget the woman I became that night at the restaurant. And there are new souls too. Kind ones, grounded ones. They're not related to me by blood, but they feel like home. As for my family, the one I was born into, they've reached out a few times. Polite, measured, little gestures that feel more like obligations than reconnection. I reply when I want to, briefly, kindly. But I no longer bend myself into someone small just to make them comfortable. It's strange, in a way, how you can love someone, but not trust them with your heart, and how peace doesn't always come from rebuilding bridges. Sometimes it comes from letting the river carry the pieces away. Last weekend, I was organizing my desk drawer, old receipts, travel notebooks, postcards I'd collected, and at the very bottom, I found that note. The one my mother slipped under my hotel room door at the Shoreline house. I had tucked it away and forgotten it. Reading it again didn't hurt. It didn't stir up old wounds. It just confirmed something I've known all along. They're sorry I walked away. Not sorry for why I had to. I placed the note back in the drawer, and then I sat down with a blank page. Because I realized there's still something left in me. Not anger, not blame, not regret, but something that deserves to be said, even if they'll never hear it, even if I never send it. A letter, not to reopen the past, but to finally, fully close it, for myself. Let me tell you about the letter I never sent. About a month after I returned from Iceland, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table on a rainy Sunday afternoon, a half-finished cup of tea growing cold beside me. Outside, the city moved in soft grays and silvers, mist clinging to window panes and rooftops like secrets no one was ready to speak. I had no plans that day, no meetings, no calls, no one expecting anything from me. And maybe that's why the idea came so suddenly. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper, addressed it to no one, and started writing the letter I never sent. Dear Mom. Actually, scratch that. Dear Linda. Because after all this time, I'm finally able to see you, not as the myth of Mom, but as a woman with her own damage, her own choices, and her own capacity for silence. This isn't a letter for blame. You taught me how to plan, how to polish, how to keep things looking good even when they were falling apart inside. I just wish once you had taught me that it was okay to fall apart. You used to call me dramatic when I cried, sensitive when I spoke up, difficult when I asked for space. So I learned to shrink, to smile through it, to carry everyone's burdens like it made me worthy. But that little girl is gone now. She's resting. She did her best. And I'm writing this not to change anything, but to free myself from the hope that you'll ever say the words I needed. You were never too much. You were enough. I paused. My pen hovered midair, ink beating at the tip. There was no anger in me, no rush of adrenaline like I'd once imagined when I thought about confrontations, just a soft ache and a quieter kind of closure. I continued. To Dad, Tom, you were always there, but not really. You taught me that silence can be louder than shouting, that a look away can feel colder than a slammed door. I spent years trying to earn your attention, thinking maybe if I was good enough, successful enough, quiet enough, you'd finally speak. But now I know your silence wasn't my fault, and your approval is no longer my currency. I don't hate you. I just wish you'd tried harder. To Noah, you hurt me the most, not because you were cruel, but because I thought we were allies. You were my brother, my anchor in a family of undercurrents, and then one day you weren't. When you sat there and watched me unravel at that restaurant, arms folded, face unreadable, I realized you'd stopped seeing me as your sister a long time ago. Maybe you thought I changed, maybe I did, but the truth is, I grew, and you stayed exactly where you were. And I'm done apologizing for that. I stopped writing. Not because I was done, but because I'd said enough. I folded the letter in thirds, slipped it into an unsealed envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, right beneath the plain ticket stubs, the old Polaroids from Blue Harbor, and a necklace Claire once gave me that reads, Still Rising. I never planned to send it. It wasn't meant for them. It was meant for me. That night, I lit a candle on my windowsill, poured a glass of wine, and played the playlist I'd once made for that doomed family trip. But this time, the songs felt different. Not haunted, not regretful, just mine. We don't always get the apology. We don't always get the redemption arc. But sometimes, just choosing not to chase the ones who abandoned you, that's the most powerful ending of all. If there's one thing I've learned through this journey, it's that healing isn't loud. It doesn't always look like grand gestures or cinematic apologies. Sometimes it's just choosing to walk away quietly, without the closure you thought you needed, and deciding that peace is more important than proving a point. For most of my life, I bent myself to fit what other people needed. I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I overextended, overgave, overexplained, until I realized none of it would ever be enough for people who only loved the version of me that didn't ask for anything in return. But now, I've stopped shrinking. I've stopped waiting to be chosen. And most importantly, I've stopped confusing access with love. Here's the truth. I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't owe anyone continued access to your life just because they share your blood. You're allowed to protect your energy. You're allowed to say, that hurt me, and still not go back. You're allowed to outgrow people who never saw your worth until it made them uncomfortable. And forgiveness? It's not about letting them back in. It's about letting yourself move forward without dragging their silence behind you. If any part of my story felt familiar, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or questioned your worth because of someone else's inability to love you well, please know you are not alone. And more than that, you are not broken. You are not too much. You are not hard to love. You are just finally remembering who you are underneath all that pleasing and performing. And that is a beginning, not an end. If this story resonated with you in any way, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, or leaving a comment below. You never know who else needs to hear that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. We're not meant to be everyone's home. We're meant to build our own.